Hey, Gary, good to see you. We're going to start at exactly 7, so just hang out for another minute. We're good to go.
Sure, great.
Thanks. Thank you.
Nice to see everybody. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what we are hoping will be some of the last Zoom-only meetings. Although we have found that this amazing technology will provide us with the means to meet after dark during the winter when people don't want to risk their lives on an icy road in their quest to save the planet. We're recording this session so that you may view it again or point your friends to the video on Drawdown East End's website. And I'm just double checking. Yes, we are recording. First, put your questions into the chat feature as we go along so that we can address them in the Q&A portion of this webinar after our panel discussion. First, our sincere thanks to the Hampton Bays Public Library and the League of Women Voters for hosting and promoting tonight's webinar. This is the 4th part of a 4-part series, The Future, a Conversation for Our Changing Times. Tonight's panelists represent a range of the vast network related to the global fashion and clothing industry, from manufacturing facilities in Bangladesh and transport to the United States to the front lines of the fashion industry in just New York City. We will talk about the clothing waste management issue, not in Ghana, but right here on Long Island. New York City's fashion industry employs 180,000 people, accounting for 6% of the city's workforce and generating almost $11 billion in total wages. An estimated 900 fashion companies are headquartered in New York City, which is also home to more than 75 major fashion trade shows and thousands of showrooms. The average salary for a fashion marketing manager is over $100,000 a year, and the competition in this industry globally is staggering if you consider the dozen major fashion centers around the globe. I pulled a quote from the movie The Devil Wears Prada, where Anthony Tucci's character first asks the new girl if they were doing a before and after piece that he didn't know about. Meryl Streep captures the importance of the role of clothing in this clip. I'm going to play it as loud as I can get it. Turn up your audio to hear her withering review.
Where are the belts for this stuff? Why is no one ready?
Here. It's a tough call. They're so different.
Something funny?
No, nothing's, it's just that both those belts look exactly the same to me, I'm still learning about this stuff and,
This stuff? Oh, okay. I see. You think this has nothing to do with you. You go to your closet and you select, I don't know, that lumpy blue sweater, for instance, because you're trying to tell the world that you take yourself too seriously to care about what you put on your back. But what you don't know is that that sweater is not just blue. It's not turquoise. It's not lapis. It's actually cerulean. And you're also blithely unaware of the fact that in 2002, Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns. And then I think it was Yves Saint Laurent, wasn't it, who showed cerulean military jackets. I think we need a jacket here. And then cerulean quickly showed up in the collections of 8 different designers. And then it filtered down through the department stores and then trickled on down into some tragic casual corner where you no doubt fished it out of some clearance bin. However, that blue represents millions of dollars and countless jobs. And it's sort of comical how you think that you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when in fact you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
So there you have it. I hope everybody got to hear that. I can post this later, not pay royalties on it.
You're in trouble now, Mark.
Yeah, I know, right? We're stealing it. Yeah, Fandango is going to be on me. You know, there are a lot of social and economic issues we could spend hours discussing, and probably topics for other webinars that we're going to have. But here's a couple of the environmental ones very briefly. From the standpoint of production and use, cotton requires thousands of gallons of water from every stage of growing the plants to washing the clothing in the years ahead. At the other end of the life of our clothes, and I'm not sure what company I read that was H&M or Century 21, sets fire to 2 billion pounds of unsold clothing every year. We use cargo ships to dump billions of pounds of clothing waste just in Ghana alone. Dawn, if you want to put the link into the documentary, it's called The True Cost, into the chat box for everyone to look at later. I'd recommend watching this soon if you haven't already. It's a film about the clothing industry and the huge volume of waste and social issues that are involved. Now to our panelists. Beth Fateni. I have the pleasure of having worked with Beth this year on a major project involving zero waste on Long Island, and she's a valuable part of the work that North Fork Audubon and North Fork Environmental Council have been doing for decades. Beth has a master's degree in environmental law from Vermont Law School, as well as 20 years of experience working in the environmental movement for nonprofit organizations in Washington, D.C. and New York. She has worked at Renewable Energy Long Island, Sustainability Institute at Malloy College, and with Beyond Pesticides, through which she coordinated educational programs, energy policy work groups, and national conferences. She's the author of the book, The Green Wardrobe Guide, Finding Eco-Chic Fashions That Look Great and Help Save the Planet. And we'll be putting links to her website and a download of an actual sheet with 100 different suggestions in a little bit. You founded Green Inside and Out in 2011 and hosts a monthly radio show on WUSD Stony Brook University Radio. Beth has been awarded the Long Island Sierra Club Environmentalist of the Year, the Woman of Distinction Award by the town of Oyster Bay, the EPA's Environmental Quality Award for her work in co-creating educational materials on children's environmental health, and the Long Island Business News Top 40 Under 40 Award in 2008, for which she is still eligible 13 years later. Beth has served as a board member of the U.S. Green Building Council Long Island Chapter, Prevention is the Cure, Slow Food North Shore, Vision Long Island, Friends of Huntington Farmlands, and the Huntington Clean Energy Task Force. She was trained by former Vice President Al Gore in 2012, lectures regularly all over Long Island on non-toxic, energy-efficient green living in both English and Spanish. She's been featured in media outlets such as News 12, Fios 1, NBC Channel 4, Newsday, The Long Islander, and a TED Talk. And I don't know what she does after lunch, but thank you for your time tonight and welcome, Beth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Gary, I've worked with Doctor. I didn't know it was Doctor. I'm sorry. Up until now, I've been working with this guy for 2 years on the Town of Riverhead's Environmental Advisory Committee and found him extremely valuable as a member, and that was before I read his resume. Gary is an associate professor and director of the Engineering Science undergraduate degree program in the Department of Materials Science and Chemical Engineering at Stony Brook University. For over 20 years, he has led research efforts in nanoscale environment materials surface interactions. Sorry, I can't even say what you do.
I can't either, don't worry.
Environmental cleanup and green technologies and novel materials designed for applications ranging from medical and energy uses to additive manufacturing, 3D printing. You're going to talk about this in a while. In order to save some time, with my apologies, Gary, I'm not going to go into detail about your work with the Department of Energy, Science Education for New Civic Engagements and Responsibilities, NYSERDA, or the National Science Foundation. Continuing, however, I will finish by saying that he is currently the Director of Additive Manufacturing Materials Prototyping and Application Center, AMPAC, and with particular attention to tonight's presentation. Gary has collaborated with the SUNY Fashion Institute of Technology and researchers at Chungong University in Seoul, South Korea, on developing environmentally benign techniques for fiber-to-fiber recycling of cotton textiles, and is currently involved in a number of research efforts to support a circular economy approach to resource conservation and recovery. In addition, he has an extensive background in engineering education research and innovative curriculum development, leading to a number of awards, including the prestigious SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching. So thank you for your time tonight and welcome, Gary.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right, so I have a number of questions to get our conversation started, and you can both run with these wherever you'd like to go. It's a kind of a freewheeling conversation. We've got a lot to cover, so we're going to do as much as we can. I was going to say that fashion is not my strong suit, and I know that people will needle me about the thread of the conversation, but Dawn, if you can put in the Beth's information for the Eco Fashion download, that'd be great. So Beth, this is you. The mission of greeninsideandout.org states that it is to empower and educate consumers about better alternatives for low environmental impact living. How did you get started with that?
Sure. Well, I started the group in 2011, and in 2017, we became a nonprofit 501c3. And, I've always been interested in the issues of toxins and ways that people can reduce them in their life. So I used to work at Beyond Pesticides on pesticide issues and at Sustainability Institute at Malloy College. And that's where I started looking into these issues of the fact that there are chemicals in our makeup and shampoos and things like that that we put on our bodies every day, and plastics and so forth. So out of that work, I started to learn about the chemicals in clothing. And, I was so surprised. And so I was going out giving lectures on green living, and people would say, I would be wearing my organic cotton, which I'm wearing now. And people would say, well, where do you get it? So I said, well, somebody should write a book about this because it's really, a cutting edge issue. So that's where the book came out of. And so the nonprofit just sort of evolved from there. We do the radio show and all of that.
That's excellent.
Hopefully producing information people need and social media and things like that.
Yeah, we're gonna do more than that tonight. We're gonna ask people to actually pick something from what they learned tonight to actually change their own behavior in that direction, one way or another. Gary, I'd like to show a short video of your well, I'm gonna call it going from cotton to cotton. I don't know if that's the right thing to say, but
Good enough.
Fashion is polluting,
hold
wasteful. Cotton especially puts huge water demands in areas where water scarcity
Maybe it won't work.
already is an
no,
issue.
it'll work. It's just,
Women
you
and
got to find a
children
better
spend
operator.
200 million hours.
Hold on, I've got to get it open first.
Yeah, it's a big. This is a file that was created by the folks at FIT as part of a. They were doing looping videos in one of their sustainable development shows at SUNY FIT, and so this was our little entry to that. So in case people are wondering where this thing came from, this minute and a half or minute and a quarter, whatever it is, video. If it works. If it doesn't work,
No, I'm going to make it work. It's just we're here. The system doesn't allow me to do two things at once, which we're all so used to doing. Let's see, Gary, here we go.
Fashion is polluting, wasteful. Cotton especially puts huge polluting.
All right, let's get back to Zoom and push the share screen and play the movie. Here we go.
Fashion is polluting, wasteful. Cotton especially puts huge water demands on areas where water scarcity is already a serious issue. Women and children spend 200 million hours a day collecting water, valuable time better spent on education critical to reversing climate change and eradicating poverty. Fashion is also a vehicle for change. Cotton muslin is used in every fashion design classroom at FIT. About a third of it goes to waste. We use green chemistry to break down cotton fabric waste into feedstock for new fibers, reducing the environmental footprint of FIT and providing a scalable model to impact the textile industry globally. In 15 minutes, our non-toxic, low-energy processes recover staple fibers and produce cellulose from discarded cotton to offer a viable conduit to turn waste into raw material, which can be spun into new fibers and create garments with dramatically reduced environmental and ethical impacts in a circular life cycle. We see waste as a missed opportunity and fashion as a vehicle for change.
There you go.
short and sweet, to the point.
Yeah, you want to run through what that's all about, Gary, because it's new.
Yeah, it's actually something that we're still working on. It really came about because of a chance meeting with some of the folks at FIT and trying to look for ways to collaborate and especially ways to share students, because the students at FIT have an expertise that our students at Stony Brook don't, and vice versa. So it's a really wonderful way to get them to work together. The idea was just essentially looking at ways to improve the circular economy approach to textiles in general. We can all throw around the numbers about how polluting the textile industry is and the fashion industry is, and the millions and millions of tons of waste that go into landfills and so forth, how much water is used, all those good things. But there's not a lot of good ways to take the material and break it down into something that without having too much of environmental cost in doing so. So a big part of what we're doing is looking at ways to take textiles and turn them back into fiber and not all the way back into glucose. There are ways to dissolve this stuff in strong acids all the way back into something that you can then start to, reformulate rayon out of, or something like that, or something else. But the idea is to really preserve the unbelievable structure of the cotton fiber. It all came about really because, with a nanotechnology perspective, the structure of the cotton, I thought cotton fiber was a chunk of cellulose, like a piece of tree. I didn't think anything of it. And yet it has all these multiple layers of windings around it, all these nanofibrils inside. It's an unbelievable system. It's a nanoscale machine that is just, as most biological materials are. It's a wonder of nature. And to throw that away by just turning it into a chemical would be incredibly wasteful. I mean, I think anyway, make a long story short, we're interested in fiber to fiber type recycling, and not just to make clothing. Our latest work is trying to see if we can use the materials that come from this in new biomedical applications as well. We just started a new project to look at using some of these nanofibrils that come from the material and turn them into nanocomposites that have very important biodegradable medical applications, where people are trying to currently use things like carbon nanotubes, which aren't the safest thing in the world, and instead replace that with cotton fiber, which would be a lot safer. So anyway, so there's a lot of interesting projects coming out of this, but that's kind of how that came about, what that actually means.
Very good. How did the South Korean connection get made?
Well, it's interesting. Well, first of all, South Korea is massive in the fashion industry. I'm not a fashionable guy. But my wife is the person that informs me of the world of fashion, and has told and said, South Korea, oh my God, Seoul, that's where they have the big fashion and everything, So I happen to know that South Korea has its own fashion institute technology, several of them, and it just so happens that one of the people I started working with on the chemical engineering aspects of the program with FIT, TJ Kim, who you saw at the end of that video, one of our 4 pictures there, his sister happens to be a professor in South Korea who works with some of these institutes. So we had a very good in with them, and they're very, very interested in this. There's a lot of, when we talk about fiber to fiber recycling, there's a lot of interest from every place from Levi's to H&M to the Stella McCartney things, all that kind of stuff. But there's been a tremendous interest from South Korea, and they, I think, have a very strong interest in trying to build a more circular economy for clothing themselves.
Mm-hmm. Beth, zero waste. Where does our stuff go? We took a tour. We were in Yaphank together a couple of months ago, and I think I know where a lot of our stuff goes.
Yeah, so I have some statistics I can share with you guys. A few years ago, I went to a conference in New York City about textile waste, and I was really shocked to learn that about 85% of textiles are sent to US landfills every year, and it's about 8% of our trash. According to the New York State DEC, residents and businesses throw away almost 1.4 billion pounds of usable and recyclable textiles every year, which is quite a bit. And then what happens to the clothing that we donate is pretty interesting. So because of my radio show, I was able to interview a company called Helpsy, and they place bins around New York City and the tri-state area, and they recycle about 25 million pounds of textiles every year, which is really great. And they explained that unused, I'm reading from a paper that we're about to publish, by the way, on textile reuse through Green Inside and Out. We just have to get it laid out in graphic design, and then you'll see it on the website. But from his research, from researching with them, I learned that unused clothing and textiles are usually collected and brought to a sorting facility and separated into bales. They are sorted by tiers of quality. So they look at, is something in good shape, not so good shape, and they may be further sorted by type, like women's business shirts or children's shorts or, things like that, men's casual wear, so forth. Unique pieces that could be used for costumes are sometimes used in the theater, which is pretty cool. But lower quality or clothing in poor condition is usually made into rags or insulation. And depending on the brand and the quality of condition, it sometimes is sent into, there's like a whole multi-million-dollar secondhand clothing industry, as I think, as you mentioned, sometimes in developing nations. So I actually saw a documentary about this called, I think it was called like The Story of Our Clothing or something. And it was a guy who followed the clothing that was donated from England down to Africa and saw how all of this, transpired with the secondhand markets, with people fighting over the bales to see who was going to get the best one that they could resell in these little, villages out in the country. So, and again, if people watch The True Cost, there's a bit about that too. A lot of our clothes in the US end up in the Caribbean, for example. And it's also interesting because of the climate, like winter wear is not as easily donated because it's going to warmer countries. So the summer clothing seems to do better. So it's pretty interesting, like, rags and insulation. Oh, and I also got some information from DEC about this. In our state, 45% of donated clothes are reused, 20% are recycled into fibers, like Gary was just saying, 30% are made into those rags or wiping cloths. But they estimate that 95% of what we're throwing out could be recycled. And one of the issues that's kind of interesting, maybe Gary has a solution to this someday, is things like Lycra and spandex cannot be recycled because they're so gummy, they gum up the machines. So we're still coming up with solutions for that.
You want to talk to that, Gary? Sure.
Yeah, sure. I'm just taking notes here as you're talking. So I always, other ideas are popping around here. Yeah, I mean, that's why a lot of things are difficult to recycle. And there's things even far more difficult than that I'm working on that are not in the textile industry. For example, carbon fiber. But anyway, which is impossible to recycle. But as far as some of the synthetic materials go, yeah, there's not an awful lot you can do with it. That's kind of why we started with cotton. I mean, we wanted to get to the low hanging fruit, and it turns out the low hanging fruit isn't hanging so low. It's not easy at all, especially since cotton is, you're not going to get it. When you think about cotton being recycled, we're working on raw muslin just as a test. That's about as pure as you can get, and even that's not pure. It's absolutely astounding how many contaminants are in pure muslin, including things from the cutting process, the sizing process, everything else. So when you get into actual clothing, I mean, you have to cope with the dyes, you have to cope with the treatments, you have to cope with everything that's been used to make it either water repellent or something to add strength to the fibers, or sometimes you get fire retardants. That's one of the reasons that in many ways, the best way to reuse is better than recycling, if it's at all possible, because it's next to impossible to recycle some of these things. And that's just the way they're made. You would actually have to make the things in the first place differently in order to make them recyclable, as we know with plastics in the environment already, right? It's depending on what you make things out of is gives you the recyclability of them. So
yeah, one of the lines that I've been using for this particular session is the buy it well, wear it well, and wear it again. Because I know that when I'm done with something, the rag pickers still don't want it. It's over. So, and that's the way I've always lived, right? But Beth, what about, Gary just mentioned fire retardants, PFAS, PFOS. Are those the things? I just realized it's in our furniture, it's in our baby clothes. Yeah, what about that?
Yeah, so PFAS is something we might be seeing a lot about in the press lately. It's perfluoroalkyl substances. So it's a class of chemicals that are used as fire retardants. And I'm actually proud to say that in New York State, I've been working through the Just Green Partnership, and a group of us have started to draft legislation that I think, as the last meeting, I was just on a webinar last week, is being taken up in New York State as legislation to ban PFAS in clothing. So there are other states, there's actually a coalition of groups working on this around the country. And so there are other states that are looking at banning these chemicals that are in furniture and electronics and other substances. And certainly in the clothing that firefighters use, the foam that's used by firefighters. So that's how we ended up getting it in our groundwater here on Long Island, because it was from all the practice runs of putting out fires. But hopefully we can find another substance that's safer to do the job.
Yeah, and we got to talk about the amount of plastic that is used for the synthetics, and I don't know all the synthetics. Rayon, what are they? Polyester is that one of them? What are they, and what are they made of? And is there a substitute? I think the big question people have is there a substitute?
Yeah, so polyester, I guess maybe some of you are aware, most people don't even think about these things, but polyester is made of plastic, which is made from oil. So we're extracting oil from the ground and turning it into fibers that we wear on our clothing. And 80% of polyester is manufactured using this chemical called antimony as a catalyst. It's not only a carcinogen, but it's also toxic to the heart, to the lungs, to the liver, and the skin. And it can also, of course, be contaminated with benzene being made from oil. So, yeah, I mean, are there alternatives? What I wrote about in my book are all the plant-based fibers, organic cotton, hemp, bamboo, though that one is controversial because they use a lot of chemicals, tencel, things like that. But there's also recycled polyester, it's not perfect. It's still, unfortunately, can produce those microfibers that we're concerned about getting out into the environment.
Yeah.
But the positive side is that it uses less energy than producing new polyester, and it keeps the polyester out of the landfill for a longer period of time.
Gary, this comes back to the idea of disruptive design. We're talking all the time about, well, maybe a plastic that's truly compostable.
Well, I mean, yeah. Oh, sorry. As I was thinking, I mean, there's radical new thought on a lot of different materials, which Beth and others may be aware of. I mean, the people I'm working with at FIT, Thean Shiros and Asta Skosir, they had started a company called Algae Knit, which was cloth made from algae, basically. They had on display recently in the city. They had their algae sneakers. And stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. In fact, one of the people I used to work with who was involved actually in designing technology for nitrate treatment in groundwater, that's one of the big problem on Long Island. He's now involved with a group that's growing seaweed off of Long Island, some big seaweed farming group, and he's been talking with the Algae Knit people, and it's these conversations and these meetings between people that can produce new ideas, and especially, as I always get back to, keeping the students involved, getting the students involved. I also did a little work with someone, I don't know if you're familiar with her, Jane Philbrick, up in at a group called TILL, T-I-L-L, in Connecticut, and they were mainly involved with using recycled materials, but what they found very important was tracing the materials, and that's a big issue with a lot of these clothing manufacturers. Levi's was very proudly at one of the meetings I was at saying they know what farm the cotton was grown on for what pair of jeans that they're selling, and they can trace it all the way back, and that traceability can assist in making sure the material is more the process is more environmentally friendly. So there's a lot of different things that can be done, and so it's great that people are paying attention to this. But how's that going to filter down into the 8 billion T-shirts at Kmart or whatever, or Walmart?
Yeah, actually, just to add on to what Gary's saying, when I wrote my book, there was a company that was making fabric from algae called Sea Cell. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've heard of them.
Yeah, that's a competitor. Yeah. No, there's actually quite a few companies in that sector now, because algae is a wonderful thing to work with.
Yep, and there's Injeo that's made from corn. There's
Mhm.
Aslan, which is made from soy, although probably GMO. So that's the downside. But like flax, linen is made from flax. So that's a more common one. But even now, I'm learning about companies that are making leather alternatives for those of us that are vegan, that try to stay away from animal products. That they're making muskin and Pinatex. It's made from pineapple skin, like a leather type alternative. So it's really exciting to see all the innovation.
Yeah, I'd be worried about wearing algae sneakers if I were going wading. I think in the sound. What, what? Nobody's talking about shearing sheep here. There's no talk
Yeah.
of wool. Why is that?
I don't know. Wool is very popular.
About that. Well, one of the things about shearing sheep is that it's not always the kindest process. So even though it's a natural substance, unfortunately, what I've learned about that is there's a process called mulesing, which is the typical sheep that are raised in Australia, for example. They tend to get kind of dirty and they have these wrinkly butts, and the flies actually lay their eggs like on the skin of the sheep, so they cut some of that wrinkly skin off,
Okay.
without anesthesia, and that's called mulesing,
Okay.
to keep the sheep healthy. So that's why vegans don't wear wool. I mean,
Got
it's not the worst thing in the world, but if there are better alternatives,
Okay.
that's what we prefer.
No, it's an honest answer. Thank you, Beth. I hadn't really considered it. Maybe you want to keep going and talk about the social implications of cheap labor for cheap clothing.
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit. My organization is a member of the New York City Fair Trade Coalition. So one of the things they obviously advocate for is for customers to, consumers to look for fair trade labeled clothing. And it basically means that, the producer, there's fewer people in between. There's fewer middlemen between the producer and the consumer. So you're really helping to support the people that are, creating these things from scratch. And often, if it's fair trade certified, they make sure that the labor conditions are good, because obviously we heard about in 2013 there was a major crash of a building in Bangladesh where about 1,000 people died, mostly women, because they were trapped in this sweatshop type factory place. So there's much more awareness about the social aspect of sustainability when it comes to clothing.
That was the Dhaka building collapse. Yeah, I have a course on learning from engineering disaster, and we talk about building collapses a lot. And it's some of the conditions are ridiculous, especially in places like Bangladesh, parts of India, China, places where cheap clothing is made in large quantity.
Yeah, and it extends to our electronics, I know, as well, but that's another webinar, a totally different discussion. But we want to talk about recycling, reusing. Somebody want to grab the idea of upcycling, because I'm not really clear on that.
Well, sure. I mean, it's basically like the idea of taking something that you don't like anymore and making it into something even better. So let's say you have a denim jacket that you don't like the style of it, but you can chop off the arms and cut it up a little bit and add some cool patches, and then you have a vest that you really like. So that's the concept of upcycling.
Mm-hmm. There's a company that's taken their stuff back, and I can't remember the name of that. I should have looked it up before we started, but there are companies that are taking certain kinds of plastic or goods and making them into something new and fresh.
Patagonia does that. They've been a real pioneer on that since the 90s. They've been taking back clothing and increasing the amount of recycled materials and organic materials that they use. And Eileen Fisher, she's a really great example. It's a little bit more on the higher end in terms of the price range, but we have one there in East Hampton for anyone that goes down to the South Fork.
All right. Beth, did you want to run your slides at this point, or you feel the need?
Sure. Just let's see. Well, I've been kind of speaking to them a little bit. but I can bring up one. Let's see.
Well, it's better if you flip through them quickly than for me to do that on you.
Sure. Let's see. How do I, I'll share, share my screen.
Mhm.
Yes, you can see it?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, well, this is a little bit about what we've been talking about, where the fashion industry needs to go from here. We overall need to pay more attention to the environmental impacts, the wearer's health. We're still doing a lot more research on the impacts of the chemicals used in clothing in terms of getting into our own bodies because they touch our skin, and the garment workers' conditions. There's another great documentary in addition to The True Cost. It's called River Blue. And it was, literally looking at, rivers in China and India that were running the colors of the local factory that, from the dyeing process. And I should mention there are natural dyes as well that we can look for, like indigo, for example. But something to look, more towards is cradle to cradle manufacturing and towards a circular fashion economy to reduce waste. I know you like that, Mark. Using 100% of one type of material to make fabrics because they're easier to recycle if it's 100% cotton, for example, rather than blends, because then those have to be separated. And there also needs to be more transparency in clothing labels and traceability of how the items are handled along the supply chain, because it's hard to know, even for the designers that want to be eco-friendly, like where did this come from and how was it produced, because we see on our clothing labels how to wash the garment and what size it is, and maybe, where it's made, but it doesn't tell us much more than that. So I think more and more companies are starting to tell the stories of their garments, who made them, and where, how, and I think that's very important. And also as consumers, we can always look for, certified like labels like GOTS, which is the Global Organic Textile Standard. It's a certain, standard that the company has to live up to in order to use that label. Europe has the Ecotex standard that's very strict, and they have these RSLs, the restricted substances lists, that they don't use certain chemicals. There's the HIG index by the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. Again, like we mentioned, the fair trade label. So these are all things that we can look for to kind of make sure that we're not just getting greenwashed. So I don't know if Gary has anything to add to all of that. That was kind of a mouthful.
No, it's all there. No, I think the standards are very important because my concern often has been that, a lot of what is being done to make clothing, more sustainable, often happens with high-end clothing. And, it's still the major problem to me is still all those, like I said, those 8 billion cheap pants and t-shirts and stuff that come out of Walmart's, and that stuff doesn't trickle down to them. And so, but the standards do. And if you get stores behind standards, if you get suppliers behind standards, that's great. So I think this is tremendous. It's dead on.
Good synthesis, Gary. Thank you.
And, just in terms of my other slide, like people say, well, what can I do right now? Like right after this webinar ends, the first thing we can do is, the next time we say, oh, I need a pair of pants or a shirt or something to wear to work now, we're going back to work, is, decide if you really need it. You might have something very similar already in the closet. And if you do decide that you need something, see if it's available at a thrift store or a consignment shop. And in fact, there's a lot of online resellers, like there's ThreadUp is an online reseller of clothing, Poshmark, swap.com, Depop is another one, the Real, I think it's called. So we can look for things like that, or eBay. But if you say to yourself, well, I can't find it there, and you do need something new, I always encourage people to seek out natural fabrics that have the least environmental impact. It's like I mentioned, like hemp is a great one. And in fact, it was a little shop in Greenport that I used to do all my shopping, but she's since closed. It was called Jet's Dream, and I dedicated my book to her. And then, of course, there's other things we can do, like laundering our clothing using eco-friendly methods, like not using Tide. It's full of fragrances, which also have chemicals. Now they sell these laundry sheets
Mhm.
that come in a paper box, so there's no plastic, and you can wash the clothes with that. Of course, instead of tossing salvageable clothing, mend it or upcycle it, like we talked about. Don't just throw it out because it's missing a button. And then always donate clothing in good condition back to thrift stores so that it can be reused.
Let me segue over to Gary. We've already gone into the lightning round. Thank you, Beth, to name the top 5 things that people can do after this discussion of fashion and fabric for the future. And I'd like everybody on the call to take a moment to write into the chat just one thing that you will make part of your habits as a result of the session tonight. Doesn't have to be complex and expensive, and I would encourage quite the opposite, easy and simple, but which will set you on the path to thinking about all of your clothing purchases and donations in the future. Gary, top 5 for you, what would they be?
Actually, one thing I was going to mention, I want to ask Beth if she's heard of this, because it's something I stumbled across, and I know your opinion of it. Have you seen there's an ethical clothing app called Good On You?
I've heard about it, but I haven't looked at it.
It's still active, and if you put any clothing brand into it, just download the app to your cell phone. It's Good On You. It still works. It looks cool. I learned about it in the meetings in the city. And you type in, say, Levi's or whatever, it'll give them a detailed ethical breakdown on their clothing, and not just the sustainable aspects of it, but how they treat their workers, how their labor agreements are, how carefully they source things, how carefully they use traceability. And it's really interesting. You can do any type of shoe brands, clothing brands, whatever. So there's one of my 5. To take a look at Good On You. I think that, because then you can just, if you're looking at a piece of clothing in a store, you can say, okay, how ethical is this company? And you just load the name into the app. But again, make sure that it's always garbage in, garbage out. You have to make sure their data is good and where they're getting it from. But they certainly seem like a good thing. And if that app isn't good, then one should be created that does exactly the same thing, because that's everybody would use it. As far as other things, I don't necessarily have a top 5, except to be aware of what you're buying, and also to challenge manufacturers. The voice of the consumer is powerful. One phone call, one letter represents so many other voices. The old with political activism, as it's one letter represents how many people. So the only way that companies really will change is if people demand it. And so probably, if I was to suggest something for people to do, it would be to demand change from companies, and to vote with their wallets, vote with their money, because that's the only thing that's going to change, at least in my memory of how things work.
No, you got it right.
And personally, I'm still wearing some of the same clothes I had in high school. So I can say
Wow,
that I mean very environmental, because I don't throw out anything. I'm sitting there with the needle and thread. I'm like, this is still good. I can glue this back together. So yeah, if you're like me, people will look at you strangely, but you'll be very environmentally benign.
Right. That's great. Hey, let's see, Dawn, we have some time for Q&A. You've got a couple of questions in the chat.
You're muted, Dawn.
Sorry.
All right.
Okay. Are there any or many high-end fashion designers dedicated to green fashion?
Yeah, I can start with this one. Certainly Eileen Fisher, like I mentioned, she's a real pioneer in this. Most of the fabrics that she uses in her clothing are eco-friendly. And they also had a campaign called I Want My Clothes Back. And a few years ago, it was part of this Green Eileen campaign that they had to take back clothing. Also Stella McCartney, like Gary mentioned, she's also been incorporating eco-friendly fabrics and repurposed fabrics for years, and she's a big name. She's Paul McCartney's daughter, so free marketing right there. But you know, Patagonia, like I said, is a great one, but y- y- unfortunately, when I researched my book, I dedicated a whole chapter to this very subject. And what I found was we looked at, we actually made a chart. We looked at 50 of, you know, some of the top runway name brands that you would find. And I was hoping to say that they're using these eco-friendly fabrics, but at the time, a few years ago, they really weren't. So I think it really comes down to what Gary said is there has to be a lot more consumer pressure, not only for things to look good, but to be good.
Ah, big difference, big difference. Dawn, you got anything else? You're going to be quiet about it, I can tell. Go ahead.
No, actually, that was the only question we've had.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, wait, but
I
wait. there's
just got
more.
another one.
If you order now.
How do consumers apply pressure?
Well, Gary, you started that one.
Like I said, communication. Make sure that you reach out to companies, reach out to them. Make sure you're talking to somebody who knows something. You know, don't settle for the first person who answers the phone. Sometimes, write to them, and you know, it's all, you know, it's all a process. And of course, you know, vote with your pocketbook. You know. It's funny when you're answering the other question, I had just remembered that. Are you familiar with the Till Lab up in Connecticut, Beth, at all?
Oh.
That Jane Philbrick, who's really a wonderful person. If you don't know her, she's very much connected to a lot of the high-end fashion people. I can send you the information. And they kind of got shut down during the pandemic. I don't see much on their events calendar, but they were hosting. What they did is they built a lab for the public in a shopping mall in Connecticut, in Stamford. And they were inviting people to come in and learn about recycling clothing. And so you could actually become part, and when they had postdocs and other scientists hired there, and they were working behind big windows. So you could actually, they would actually see it. It was right next door to a Gap. And so you could actually see what people were doing and how they were doing stuff. So you had a real visionary idea for it. I don't know if they've been too active lately, but anyway, that was kind of going back to the other question. But I can send, if I can find that link, I can send it around. But if you look up TILL, Till, I think it's the Till Lab or something they called it. And Jane Philbrick, PHILBRICK, I think, has she used to she was part of the studio group at MIT at one point, a bunch of things that she's done, a lot of very interesting things. But anyway, that was something I just wanted to toss in there.
Thank you. I do want to recap something that Drawdown uses. It's called the 4 levels of engagement, and we touched on all of them tonight. What we use those to do is to target audiences and to define our own actions. So at the very basic, it's a personal level. If you don't feel like calling Patagonia and thanking them, you can just do something at home, like find clothes that are sustainably made, how to buy them well. Consumer signaling and social norms become the communication, like you said, Gary, communicate, making it cool to have, you know, your high school sport coat. Where to take your clothes when you're done with them. We should produce a list to give out and put up on our YouTube and our Dropbox tools.
We'll
What's that?
We'll share our paper when we do it. We made a whole list.
Okay, yeah, and then we'll take your downloadable eco chic sheet and put that up there as a reference and a point of discussion for people. We're also talking about putting up a repair cafe in Greenport now. I think the closest one we've got is Port Jeff, and if we get one out here, it's going to include somebody with a sewing machine. Or a tub of glue or whatever Gary uses to put his jackets back together, or put the sleeves back on when you decide you want that vest to be a jacket again. The municipal level, we're talking about achieving zero waste on Long Island. That's going to be a huge lift, and we're going to be talking a lot about that for the rest of this year. And on the national level, we've got to talk to industry. We've got to talk about the thing called extended producer responsibility, and that's having people take their stuff back after they make stuff, or make it so that I can recycle it properly or upcycle it at the end of useful life. And then disruptive design, having these companies become the leaders in their field by doing something really, really cool and the right thing at the same time. Dawn, if you could put into the chat, I have a couple of people, they suggested Fashion Takes Action and treehugger.com, of course, the no clothes pledge. Oh, sorry, no new clothes pledge, and wear what's in your closet. So if you could drop those into the chat, I haven't seen them yet, I'm sorry, but these are the kind of things that we pledge to do. Public commitment is a great driver for doing things and following through, because you've made a public commitment on that. If anybody has other questions or comments, please go to drawdowneastend.org on the website, put them through our email system, and someone will get back to you. Finally, again, many thanks to the League of Women Voters and to the Hampton Bays Public Library for hosting and promoting tonight's webinar. Our thanks to the North Fork Environmental Council and North Fork Audubon for being faithful participating partners as always. Of course, thank you to all our Drawdown East End team who make these webinars come to life and for pointing us all in the direction of possibilities, not just in providing solutions to drawing down CO2 to reverse global warming, but in engaging us all in creating a life-affirming culture. Our laws are made in the don't do this, don't do that format, and it is up to us to create the life-affirming culture which makes the let's do this great thing instead part of all we do in Drawdown East End. Thank you all for your attention tonight. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Beth, for your time and your talents. Really appreciate this. It was a lot of fun, I hope. We appreciate it very much. And everybody, good night and stay well. Thank you, Dawn.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Be
Thank
safe.
you.
All right.